Inflation is a term that is used to describe the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising, and subsequently, the purchasing power of money is decreasing. It is a critical measure for policymakers and economists to understand how well an economy is performing. So how exactly is inflation measured? The most common measure of inflation is the Consumer Price Index, CPI. This index measures the average change in prices over time of a basket of goods and services consumed by households. The basket of goods and services includes a range of products such as food, housing, transportation, and healthcare, and the weight of each product in the basket is determined based on its relative importance to consumers. The first step in measuring inflation using the CPI is to determine the composition of the basket of goods and services. This is typically done by conducting a survey of households to determine their spending patterns. The survey results are then used to determine the weight of each item in the basket. For example, if households spend more on food than they do on transportation, then the weight assigned to food in the basket will be higher than that assigned to transportation. Once the composition of the basket is determined, the next step is to collect price data on each item in the basket over time. This is typically done by conducting monthly surveys of retail stores, service providers, and other establishments that sell the goods and services in the basket. The price data collected is then used to calculate the change in prices for each item in the basket. The third step in measuring inflation is to aggregate the price changes for each item in the basket to arrive at a single index. This is done by calculating the weighted average of the price changes for each item in the basket. The weights used are the same as those determined in the first step. The CPI is expressed as a percentage change in prices over time. For example, if the CPI in 1 year is 3%, it means that the average price of the basket of goods and services has increased by 3% from the previous year. It is important to note that the CPI is not a perfect measure of inflation. One limitation is that it may not accurately reflect the spending patterns of all households. For example, if some households spend more on healthcare than the average, they may experience higher inflation than what is reflected in the CPI. Additionally, changes in the quality of goods and services may not be fully captured by the CPI. To address some of these limitations, other measures of inflation have been developed, such as the Producer Price Index, PPI, and the Personal Consumption Expenditures, PCE, Price Index. The PPI measures changes in the prices of goods and services at the producer level, while the PCE measures changes in the prices of goods and services purchased by households. In conclusion, measuring inflation is a critical part of understanding the health of an economy. The CPI is the most common measure of inflation, and it is determined by surveying households to determine the composition of a basket of goods and services, collecting price data on each item in the basket, and aggregating the price changes to arrive at a single index. While the CPI has limitations, it provides a useful tool for policymakers and economists to make informed decisions.